The very essence of the mental game is this. The only reason an event matters is because we make it matter.
Welcome to the Mullins Farrier podcast, where I will sit down and converse with the superstars, the overachievers, the masters of our craft. Each episode will be a deep dive into their personal philosophies, their habits, the tools they use, and the secrets to not only their success, but overcoming failure as well.
First, find somebody you can mimic, then find somebody you can stand, and then try to focus on one style until you master that style.
So if you say I can't do something, well, you're absolutely right. But if you say you're going to, you're absolutely right with that too.
People say that you shouldn't define yourself by your work. That is not true.
You know what Dave Farley does when he's, lucky enough to be at the World Equestrian Games? I'm watching other people work.
Yeah.
I don't think we do that enough.
This podcast is for all of you out there who share my passion for the job and the desire to always improve. These interviews will put you in touch with the inner workings of the role models we all want to emulate. So let's get to it.
There's only so many hours in a day, and it's a matter of what you do with them.
Welcome, everyone. A little shopkeeping. As I record this, the Ontario Farriers Convention is in full swing, and I had the privilege to interview Mr. Stephen Bean, who is the judge and headlining clinician this year. So stay tuned for that episode. Also, Simon Curtis's webinar with Hans Castilians on clubfoot in young and old horses is coming up on October 1st. I've always come out of Simon's webinars with new knowledge that was well worth the price of admission. For a discount when ordering tickets, use the discount code MULLINS at checkout. Go to drsimoncurtis.com. Also, after a brief summer break, the Lockdown Farrier podcast is back in full swing, and its host, Daniel Bennett, has been putting them out in rapid succession, armed with new recording equipment and an epic new theme song. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I'm also looking forward to linking up with Mr. Bennett at the end of October for the Stoneleigh International Farrier Competition and the Farrier Focus Convention. Stay tuned for a plethora of episodes from that one. Today's guest comes from the other side of the planet from me, where every creature big and small is seemingly trying to kill you, and the toilets flush in the wrong direction. I'm talking today to Dean Lewis, AWCF. If memory serves, Dean is one of only a couple AWCFs in the country, and in corresponding with him, I discovered that we share a mutual friend in Mr. Daniel Bennett. It never ceases to amaze me how small the farrier world truly is. It has been a lot of fun getting to know this kind and thoughtful man from the other side of the planet, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Do you get weekends off?
Oh, I never used to, but I only have one job I do on the weekends now. It's one dressage stable, and they ended up becoming more than clients; they're friends now. So when I decided not to work weekends, I said I wasn't going to go back there, and they said, "Oh no, you can't do that." Once every 6 weeks, I get off my backside and go over there and see them.
Okay,
That's the trouble when your clients become your friends.
I know. Yep.
You're expected to do it.
That's right. Yeah, even if you try to, have time for yourself. Too bad. So you sent me some pictures of your walls of all the standardbred racing photos. So so both your wife and your family, that was their thing?
My family's a famous harness racing family. I'm fourth generation, and I was sort of brought up by my grandmother. We always lived on properties that my grandfather was he done really well out of it. Had the highest stake earning horse in Australia in the 70s.
Holy.
Late 60s, early and 1970 when he hit a Dominion in Melbourne. So yeah, I think Old David was the highest stake earning horse in Australasia at the time. Yeah, so we always had reasonably big properties and we had farms. And my mother had raised me and my sister by herself. We always lived on one of my grandfather's farms, so I was basically brought up by my grandmother more than anyone else because Mum was always working. She got a cart made, actually. She got a sulky made with a little square tub in the front, and even when I was like 2 or 3, I was always out there with her, and she'd cover me up in horse rugs, and we'd go out and work the horses, and that's how it all started. And funnily enough, sounds silly, but at the time, you were being groomed for something. I think my grandfather was grooming me to be free labour, but my grandmother was grooming me to be a horse person. She was an exceptional horsewoman, unbelievable. Never seen it. She was actually one of the driving forces behind women being able to drive against the men. Because, back in those days, women weren't allowed to drive against men, They'd have exhibition races for ladies. She always be pretty upfront on them. So, yeah, so she was always telling us, she'd say, have a look at this boy, and this is how they trot, boy, and this is what they do, and this is how they go. And, the horse would have a curbed hock, and she'd say, oh, you see what this is, or have spavin or something. I never realised it at the time. I was lucky, but she used to tell me to have an inquiring mind and ask. She said, you can't ever fix things if you don't understand why they happen. That's helped me all my life in my horseshoeing career. I didn't realise a lot of the times why I was doing what I'd done. I was just become second nature.
Right.
And to us on our farm, horses were horses, whether they were standard bred or thoroughbred or warm blood. Because my grandfather, he had one farm that the main farm where we lived most of the time. We had there was 800 acres there. Part of the farm was just for the horses, so there was 36 adjustment paddocks, quarter-acre adjustment paddocks. So people were always adjusting there. And Mum and Nana, they run the horse side of things. Everybody get up in the morning and work the horses. And my grandfather couldn't get out of there quick enough. He off to go to the other side of the farm, and we have fine wool merinos and beef cattle and crop. So he decided that I was going to be a shearer and unhired labour. I was just labour. Wasn't hired. I was just labour.
Voluntold.
Yeah, that's right. He protested any time in my life that I wanted to do anything with a horse. I think I make money out of horses, he said. I make money out of horses, make money out of the farm. So, which wasn't right because he did. But harness racing at that stage was at its peak in Australia, I think.
Okay.
When he won a race in Melbourne in those days, you used to be able to take the stake from that race and go and buy a new car.
Really?
Yeah, today if you took the stake from the race, you'd be lucky if you could buy the wheel nuts. That's where it's gone, and I think you and I were talking about it, and I think similar sort of things happened in your country. Harness racing, it's sort of fell by the wayside a bit, which is a shame because they're great horses.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and that's basically how I ended up becoming a farrier, because I didn't want to be a farrier. I thought I wanted to be a shearer because that's what I was told I had to be. But he said, I said I wanted to drive in races. You could drive in races when you're 16, and I wanted to drive fast work at home when I was about 13. That appealed to me because he was such a famous trainer and been all around the world or all around Australia and Australasia driving good horses. Everybody used to come and stay at his place. They'd bring horses from New Zealand or Perth or South Australia, and everybody would sort of be a go-to place. And so you got the opportunity to see all the good horses. And of course, that was very appealing to a young lad that thought he wanted to be a trotting driver. Anyway, he said to me, "Oh, you want to be a trotting driver?" He said, "You've got to learn to shoe a horse." And I thought, well, doesn't sound right to me, but anyway. So I started tacking on shoes, and one would lose a shoe, and I'd put it back on, or try to. And then I thought, this can't be that hard. If you want to do it, you just teach yourself. I want to drive a horse, so I'm going to have to shoe one. So my grandmother had given me a little horse. He was like me. He had short legs and a short barrel. He probably went about as fast as I do when I run too. He wasn't very quick. She gave me this little horse she bred. She said to me, I remember saying to me, she said, "You'll ruin this horse, boy." She said, "But he will teach you more than you've ever learnt in your life." And I thought, I don't understand what that means, but anyway, so that was right. But he was the worst crossfiring thing I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen a horse since that crossfired as bad as this horse. I started trying to learn to shoe horses, because I thought, well, if I've got to shoe a horse before I can drive one, I'll go down and I'll take the shoes off this horse and I'll I'll put them back on myself. So I did this one summer night about 6 o'clock. My grandfather gone up the house. I thought, I'll go and shoe Hayes, I used to call him. And I pulled his shoes off. Stupid me, pulled all 4 off.
You were in
Yeah,
it.
I pulled all 4 off, and now I got one back on, and I was knackered. I thought it went against me grain, but I had to go and ask for help. So I went up to the house and I said to him, I've tried to shoe my horse and I can't get the shoes back on. And he said, all right then. So he lit a cigarette, walked down behind me, went in, and I thought, well, he's on a feed bucket, and he sat down on the feed bucket, and he said, well, where you go? And I said, what, aren't you going to help me? So I am. I'm watching you. Put them back on. You took them off, you put them back on. That's where it all started, basically. And fortunately for me, again, through their connections with other people, my grandmother had a very good trotter at the time. He actually started as a pacer, and she converted him to a trotter. She sent him over to Carl O'Dwyer, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with O'Dwyer horseshoes.
Yeah.
Carl shod this horse, and I was about 14 at that point. And I went over there and I sat in there and I watched Carl shoe the horse. He made mushroom shoes for it and put leather pads on it. And he made the shoes, and I'm sitting there watching. I thought, that was like a light bulb moment. I thought, geez, I want to be like that man. I want to do that. And
Right.
I thought, I just seen what he'd done, and I seen how he helped the horse, and it just, to me, it felt like, it was a powerful thing to do to help a horse like that. And anyway, the horse
Right.
went out, and he was Australasian Trotter of the Year that year, and he's a very good horse. So I thought that's what I wanted to do, and so I was fortunate that Carl, all of my career, I've been able to ask, or I've been able to enlist help by people that knew a lot more than I did, and that's well, the quote of Henry Ford's, isn't it? Here lies the man that surrounded himself by people who knew more than he did,
Right.
And Carl's always been a bit of a driving force to me. I'll tell you that story a bit more in a minute. But anyway, he fixed that up, and then I came home and I thought, well, I want one of them fire things that he had. So I got a plough disc, an old plough disc that's worn out there, and I taught myself to weld, and I welded it with there. I welded the 3 little legs on it, and I found an old vacuum cleaner of my mother's, and I put it on reverse and put it underneath it, and I had no idea how I was going to get it going. And anyway, I got some wood and put the wood on it, and mate, it was. My grandfather walked in the shed and there was smoke and dust and fire everywhere, and he said, "What in the bloody hell are you doing?" And I said, I'm making a fire. And I used to get in trouble for doing things like that. But anyway, I had no idea what I was doing. Carl, I think, or someone, gave me a little piece of concave, And you remember back in those days, or I don't know if you do, but in Australia we had this little thin, like, standard galloping plate concave that was a 1/4 inch thick and sort of 8 mil wide. It was just horrible, little
Okay.
twisty, horrible stuff. I never knew how to put a heel on a piece of concave. Nobody'd never shown me. And I just had a pair of wire straining pliers that I used as tongs. And anyway, I tried to make this horseshoe, and mate, it was, you got no idea. I wish I'd have kept it to remind me how bad I used to be. Anyway, I had no idea how to get
We all have to start somewhere.
I made myself up what I thought was a Pritchell, but it was out of mild steel, and I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't go through. And I had no idea what I was doing. There was a chap there staying there with some horses in South Australia, and his name was Jim Hurley. Now, Jim Hurley, he was a very astute trainer from South Australia, very, very good trainer, very good horseman. And he used to be a mounted policeman in the South Australian Police Force. And when he was doing that, he met a man called Tom Roberts, who used to train the police in South Australia at the time, from the 60s. And Tom Roberts started out as a rough rider in the British Army.
Okay.
He wrote a series of books, and they're probably the best books you'd ever read if you're interested in horsemanship and that. Anyway, Jim walked in. He was standing there watching me, and he said, "You don't know what you're doing, do you?" I said, "I got no idea." He said, "I'll show you how to do that." So he went and got a hammer, and he made a stamp for me. And then he said, "Oh, you've got to have a harder piece of steel for the Pritchell." And so he made a stamp, and then he made me a little clipping hammer and taught me how to put a little clip on.
Oh, cool.
He started me off, and he always helped me, if I ever had trouble with something too. And so this little horse of mine, this Hayes that I couldn't get to go without half falling over every time I crossfired that bad. And Jim said, "I will shoe him." So he started showing me. And my grandfather used to go crook at him for wasting his time. But anyway, that's how I started. So it eventuated from there, Brian. And
Did you ever get him to stop crossfiring?
no. I remember having the first 6 drives I had at the trials. The day my grandfather allowed me to go to the trials, and he got out of the truck, and I took the horses off the truck, and I said, "Are you going to help me harness them up?" And he said, "No, I'm going to sit in the grandstand. You want to drive them, you do the work." So I was flat out all day with these 6 horses, and Mum helped me. She just started driving against the men at the time, or a couple of years prior to that.
Okay.
My mother was the first woman ever to win a race on a square goater against the men in Australia. So she
cool.
represented Australia in Europe, I think in 1980, 80, 82, something like that. So yeah, Mum helped me yoke him up. But this little horse, I took him there that day. He was the only fail I got in the draw because he galloped 3 times in the run. Yeah, he was the only fail. He never stopped cross. He's a lovely little horse. And I just chucked the saddle on him and rode him. It was safer that way. I went from there, and I thought I knew a bit about that. I started driving and drove in a few races. Had more falls before I had wins. And then I thought I always had an affiliation with the army. I always wanted to love the army. I was down the street one day and I ran into an army recruiter. He was very convincing. I went home. I was 17 and 8 months. So I had to be 17 and 8 months and to get parental consent to join the army. And see, I never had any money or nothing. I was just shoeing horses. And I never got paid for it. It was always at home, so never had any money. So I thought,
right, yeah,
this army thing sounds all right. They're going to pay me. Oh, this sounds good. So I went home. I took the enlistment papers home and showed Mum, and she nearly had a heart attack. And she said, "You really want to do that?" I said, yeah, sign the papers. So she signed the papers, and much to my grandfather's disgust, I joined the army. And like I think I remember getting to recruit camp, or I suppose you guys call it boot camp over there, or something, recruit camp here. And I got there, and all these guys were thinking how hard done by they were, you know. I got there and I thought, well, this is the best thing ever. They clothe you, they feed you, they give you a rifle to play with, they pay you, and they only yell at you if you do something wrong. I thought, how good is this joint, you know? And I couldn't believe me. I got in trouble the first time I got paid, actually. You can go to the pay parade and you stand there and you salute the officer and he gives you the pay and he says, "Count your pay." And I said, "Oh, it'll be right, sir." And he said, "Count your pay." I was just happy somebody was giving me money. I didn't care much it was. Anyway, so I'd done that. Because I was young, I was easily influenced by things like that, and I liked the army. I'm sure if the Australian Army at the time had horses in it, I would have stayed, but they didn't have horses. They got rid of horses in 1958 and the Veterinary Corps. So I thought, no, I still sort of wanted. So I always shot horses even when I was playing around with the army stuff. But anyway, I come home, worked on a thoroughbred farm for a while as a stud groom. Give the thoroughbreds a go for a while. I enjoyed that. That was good. Learned different things about, a different aspect of horses just from other than standard breds,
Yeah, a very different personality, right?
Yeah, and I couldn't believe how stupid they were, to be honest with you. I got offered a top trainer, a bloke called Graham Lang, offered me a job he said it was a foreman's job, but anyway, that sounded good at the time. He said, "You don't want to be working with them thoroughbreds, you want to work with standardbreds. Come over and work for me." Well, I did, and that was probably the best decision I ever made because I met my wife there. Probably wasn't a very good decision on her part, but anyway, I think it was one of the better ones I made. And so, yeah, I worked for Graham for a long time. He was really, really good to me, giving me my first winner and helped me out. No end. He was a really, really good top trainer, top driver. And I worked, friends of the family for years, So that was good. But Donna and I decided we'd train horses of our own, which is pictures that you seen the other day that I sent you. And
right.
We trained horses, started up our own stable. And I was listening to one of your podcasts the other day, Brian, and I heard you say you were talking about how hard it was over there at the time. It was pretty hot and, you've got to look after yourself and your family. And at the end of the day, you come first, And
yeah,
hit a nerve with me because that's what ended up happening with me. Like Don and I were working a fair few horses and, her father's a top trainer and I was driving some for him. And so basically we'd get up, work the horses and she'd go to do a job. I'd go shoeing horses of an afternoon. We'd come home, get in the truck, and go to the race at night. You can only do that for so long. And what ended up happening with me, I was that busy working and I forgot to live. You're trying to make a life for yourself, and you think, and you do, you lose track of where you're going. You get blinkers on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I think that happens to a lot of young people. But anyway, come to a big crunch because we had one day in 1994, my wife come home and she said, we're going to have a baby. Oh, that was a pretty big day. But what made it worse is I had an appointment with the doctor that afternoon. And I went on a hell of a roller coaster ride that day, emotions, because I went down to the doctor in the afternoon. He told me I had cancer. So
Oh, my.
that was a big day. So basically what ended up happening, everything stopped the way it was. So I had to go and be treated, and chemotherapy and surgery and different things. And we lost a lot of our horses that were working. And I got a little bit disillusioned about the industry because, people took horses off here. Mum kept going with a skeleton crew of horses home here and done a huge job keeping the horses going. Donna was still working. It was a very difficult time. And I got pretty disillusioned with the industry and some of the people in it that I'd been driving for that sort of turned their back on me and things like that. So, I thought they did.
Sorry to interrupt. It's interesting when you all of a sudden can't serve the purposes of certain people, how your relationship to them changes drastically, right?
For sure, and you don't really know what true colours of people until
Exactly. Until you're put in that situation.
And it's the same thing you say. It's also exactly the opposite. And the other thing, you know who your real friends are because they're the ones that stand by you.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, so we got back and, I couldn't shoe horse. I was too sick. Got back and I decided when I got back that things had to change. I couldn't keep going the way I was going.
Yeah.
Again, Carlo Dwyer. I spoke to him there one day and I said, I don't know, I think I might just shoe horses. And he said, well, you can shoe a horse all right. He said, but you want to go back and get qualified. Because I wasn't qualified, I was just a tacker on her.
Now, and would this be qualified with an Australian association or the British one?
They had a TAFE at the time, and it hadn't been going all that long. And it's a level 3 in Farrier, really.
Okay.
Anyway, so I thought, well, yeah, I'll go do this. And the guy that was the best thing I've ever done, really, because Carl was right. He said, the way the world's going, he said, people look towards qualifications. He said, if you're going to do it, you should be qualified and learn how to do it properly. And I said, fair enough. So everybody's got to start somewhere. And I went down, I thought, I'm going to make a goose of myself here. And I went down with a guy called Colin Smith, was our trade school teacher at the time. Englishman, AWCF. He taught me how to make a shoe properly. And he'd had a tool making course. He's a great tool maker, he is. He had a tool making course. I like doing that too. I like working with metal. So I did this tool making course as well. And I thought, gee, how good's this? And then what they were doing at the time is they were trying to upgrade the thoroughbred racing industry, and this level 3 that they were doing to be a thoroughbred racetrack farrier, to have a racetrack license, you had to get this level 3 by a certain time. See? So there was a lot of guys going through it at the time. The Master Farriers Association in Victoria was sort of overseeing that. It was only in Victoria. They're all doing these exams, these level 3 exams, and you had to. It was pretty simple exam if you look at it from the perspective of today. But make a pair of shoes and put them on, and a little bit of a questionnaire, and that sort of thing. It didn't really matter whether you made concave or forward or plain stamped, or just make a pair of shoes and put them on. So I thought I was pretty good at this shoemaking by the time Colin showed me how to do it. And Colin told me I was all right at it. So I thought, well, I'll make the hardest thing I can. So I made 3/4 fullet shoes and put them on. And that's where I started there. And I had remembered that my grandfather, we had a chap working for us. A lot of blokes used to work for us at different times. And this guy was from England. And he said, if you ever get a chance, he said, they're proper farriers in England. He said, they've got a thing over there. I don't know what it is. He said, but they do it properly. I guess what he was alluding to was the Worshipful Company of Farriers. He probably didn't know what it was, but
right.
Yeah, that's what he told me. And of course, Colin, being an AWCF, you inquire as to what that is. And of course, once I sort of got that qualification, I got involved with the Australian Farriers and Blacksmiths Association. And that was another thing I was taught at an early age. If you're working in an industry, whether it be harness racing or farrier industry or whatever, I was made go to all the trainers and drivers meetings as a boy, and I was taught that you can't take from an industry unless you give back. Which I think is something that some of the young guys at competitions today miss. That might be an attitude problem or probably different culture. I don't know, but anyway, that was how I was taught, and so I always had to be part of a committee. I was made to be, and so I joined the Australian Farriers and Blacksmiths Association, and anyway, I done my share on the committee and ended up over the years. I sort of worked my way up, treasurer, secretary, president, all that sort of thing, and they basically run competitions. So I thought I wouldn't mind giving this competition thing a go, and that's how that happened. And started going to farrier competitions, which was good for me because I had a competitive nature. So I enjoyed that, and by doing that, and AFBA, they had always brought out astute farriers from overseas. The Mallender brothers come out to judge one time, Edward Martin, Bob Marshall. I went to a Bob Marshall clinic. That changed me forging forever. Bob's just one of the best teachers I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Wilson, eventually David Gully. David Gully come out. There's that many. Roy Bloom, there's been heaps of guys come out here, and we're fortunate. Australia's always been one of those places where people want to come to. And one thing about the AFBA, we've always looked after it or hosted them properly. And I heard what Derek said the other day when you were interviewing Derek Gardner. He said, doesn't matter where you go in the world, you can always find a bed.
Yeah.
In our little community, that's for sure. Anyway, David Gully was the one that, when he came out here, he said to me, why don't you, he stayed here for a while, done a couple of clinics, and he stayed here for a while, and he said, why don't you come over to England and work for me for a while? So I thought, I can't get away really, but got a little run here. But anyway, I ended up going over there, and he said to me, you Australians can shoe horses all right, but you have no idea about anatomy and things like that. He said you got to get your schooling up in that respect. And I said, well, I don't think that's real fair. Anyway, David's, well, hopefully you'll meet him when you get over there to England.
Yeah, no, looking forward to it.
Have a yarn to him. But yeah, he's a great man. And of course, he taught Gary Darlow, and Gary Darlow taught Derek Gardner. And I think Danny Bennett sent me and I'll send it to you after. He sent me a poster of all David Gully's apprentices and the ones that have come.
Oh yeah, he talked about that in his interview with him.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's
wild.
It is. I'll actually send it to you later on.
Okay, yeah,
because there's some great names like Gary Darlow, Cecil Swan, Derek Gardner. I think Sarah Vines on. I think Sarah was Derek's apprentice, wasn't she? But there's some great people on there, and it's just a legacy of what one man's done. It's awesome. So anyway,
no kidding.
I always thought I worked there for a while. I was lucky enough to go to Stoneleigh International. David invited me. I was a steward there and just watched some of the best guys in the world. They're just unbelievable. Craig Trinket judged that year, and I just nothing but admiration for the man and the way he went about the job. Terrific judge. Him and Gary Darlow both judged together, and I was very privileged to be close and watch what they were doing.
Yeah, no
and
kidding.
Certainly when you do get an opportunity to judge your peers, it's I'm sure it's one of the greatest feathers in your cap, and that your peers will allow you to, will give you the honour to judge them. I think that's, and the way Craig went about it was ultimate professional. David actually convinced me they're actually going to. He tried to get me in the individual, but they never had a foot left over. I'm grateful I didn't, because I would have made a mess of it, I reckon. But he entered me in the blacksmithing. I didn't want to go in the blacksmithing. He entered me in, and I said, I haven't got any tools. He said, we'll find you some tools. So he said, Cecil, grab some tools for the boy. I said, I know, I'd never practiced or nothing. Anyway, I went in it, and I don't know how it happened, but I won it.
Oh, wow.
So I won the blacksmithing there. I sort of got encouraged to do a bit of blacksmithing.
What did you make?
A breakaway hook, wagon wheel lock, we call them over here. Used to make them for the back of all the turnouts at the shows. I used to have to hang one on the back, so it's a wheel brake. Has a chain on one end, and it's at the breakaway length. Anyway, David's got to hang it in his shop, and he loved it. He thought it was terrific. But I think the only reason it won because it had a weld in it and nothing else did. But there was one set item you had to make too. So anyway, I was lucky enough to win that. So I think it was more luck than it was anything else. But yeah, that's where it started. And I thought, well, if I ever get the opportunity so I'd love to have that WCF thing, I didn't think there was ever going to be an opportunity for us to do that, and you just never know what's around the corner, Brian.
Yeah, no kidding. Like, how long did you stay in England?
I was over in England and Europe, back and forth a fair bit. Don and I were over there for, I don't know, month, 6 weeks, something like that. And, went around and worked, was lucky enough to, a lot of people were great, When you got a business home here, you can't be away from it that long. And that's why you had to stay there at the time. I think David said you had to stay there for at least 6 months or something to do the WCF over there. And so I thought, well, that's never going to happen. So, I was lucky enough. I worked with Stephen down in Mallender and went out with Darren Basin for a day. Darren was he was a British team coach that year. Went with Darren for a day. It was great working with him. Like, everybody was just terrific, Worked most of the time with Gully.
Mm-hmm.
Donald wanted to go to Newmarket, so he dropped in and seen Simon Curtis. And there was a couple of Aussie boys working for him at the time. And one of them, actually, Andrew Skinner, he got his diploma while I was over there. So I went to the ceremony and I thought, geez, how good is this?
Yeah.
That was that. And I thought, well, we'll probably never get a chance to do that here. I'd sort of work towards it, trying to get something to happen. And what ended up happening, and I'm sure this was the catalyst of why the Worshipful Company ended up coming to Australia, or certainly helped. I don't know if it was a catalyst or not, but it certainly helped. As you know, I met Chris at Calgary, 2008, Chris Gregory. Chris and I were talking, and it was at the same time when, well, I think it was about then, I think Robbie mentioned it the other day on your interview, was when he was made the exam for Brazil, the FITS exam.
Yeah, right.
Chris said to me, he said, we'll come out there and do the FITS. And I thought, oh, that'd be all right. And I thought, well, that'll be good. I'll go back and I'll talk to Master Farrier Association, and I'll be a stepping stone towards, because at the time, I know Chris was he sent a letter to the Worshipful Company. He was an examiner at the time, and he'd sent a letter to them asking if they'd recognise it, and he hadn't heard back at the time.
Right.
I went there and I said to the Master Farrier Association, I said, this thing, I met this guy over there. He's got this exam and he'll bring it out here and be a stepping stone towards this. And somehow or other, some smarty seen this letter I wrote, and what I'd put in it, I said that Chris had requested Worshipful Company to look at it. And someone had changed that to turn the words around to say that it was recognised. And of course I got
Oh dear.
I got a little letter off Mr. Goodall, and he said, that's not right. And I said, well, that's fine. I said, but Chris was going to come out here and he ended up, the Master Farrier Association, they didn't want to do the FITS exam. So Bob Sim ended up getting Chris out a year or so later. I can't remember. I've got it up here on the board here somewhere. Oh, I can't remember when it was. So Chris came out and did the exam, and we all went to the exam. And it was him and Steve Newman on the exam. Anyway, Mr. Goodall written me a letter, and I wrote back to him and said, well, here's the letter that I wrote, and doesn't say anything like that. And I didn't like getting the backside kicked when I didn't have anything to get kicked for. So I got on my high horse a bit, and I sent him back a letter and said, look, this is what it was, mate. It wasn't what you think. And anyway, he understood that. And I said, but Australian people, Australian farriers out here would be more than happy if the Worshipful Company would like to come out here and do the diploma. And he said, oh, well, there's not a need for it. There's nobody's, he was under the impression, or somebody had told him that nobody wanted to do it. And I said, well, mate, how many do we need? I'm sure that if Chris hadn't have come out here and brought the FITS out, that the Worshipful Company probably recognised that there was a need or people wanted to do their exam, And so I guess it was, I guess in a way it was something that was marketable for them. And to see that there's other countries that really, they do want to get better. We don't need any qualification to shoe horses in Australia, but people go out and hang up their shingle and shoe horses, much to the detriment of the horse, I'd say.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're shoeing horses and you're starting out, you just don't know what you don't know. Once you have an opportunity to sit an exam of any sort, doesn't matter. Like the FITS exam itself is one of the physically hardest exams I've done. It's physically very hard.
Yeah, me too.
Worshipful Company's exams are the hardest exams I've ever done. They are very full on, and not only that, it's the way you conduct yourself and what you do, and how you dress, how you talk. what you do in the exam, to be examined by your peers like that. It's a bit daunting. And I'll tell you something, when they came out here and done the diploma, I've never been under so much pressure in my life. I've driven in some big races and things like that. But that was nothing to this, because I got there and I thought, if I don't pass this, I should never have been shoeing horses all these years.
Oh, we all have that thought in any exam.
Well, it's like somebody just... I said to one of my apprentices one time, I said, you got to go and look at what other things are and what other people do. Otherwise, you're just a frog that's sitting in the bottom of a well looking up that sees a light and never knew what was on the other side. And sometimes Farrier can be like that, especially in our country, because our country's so big and there's a lot of good farriers in Australia. We're so far away from each other, whereas you've got great pool of top farriers in England and that, but they go and make shoes together.
They're all within a drive of each other.
Whereas, some of your mates in Australia are 2.5 hours flight away or 3 hours flight away, And with fuel and things like that, it's very hard for guys to get together and practice, especially if you're going like on a 4-man team or something overseas. It's almost impossible sometimes, very expensive, So so we did the diploma in, I can't remember what year it was. Oh, I can. It's up here somewhere. 2014 was the diploma, so I reckon the fits must have been done about 2012 when Chris came out. So that sort of took that amount of time to sort of get things rolling. And John Bunting, he was sort of instrumental. He was the president of the Master Farriers at the time. He was the one that sort of, between a fair few of us, that tried to drum up people for the diploma. The Victoria Master Farriers supported that, and they administered it, done the administration, which was John probably done it most of himself. Anyway, that's what happened. And of course, luckily, they decided not long after that they were going to do higher examinations. So they came back in 2 years and give us the opportunity to do that too. And I wasn't anywhere near as nervous doing my AW, to be honest with you, because I didn't think I'd ever have the chance anyway. So
you're just appreciative.
I was glad I could do it. I worked very hard and tried very hard and studied very hard and done all them things. But, it's like the torch in the army. Prior preparation and planning prevents piss poor performance.
So what is that again? Say that. I need to write that down.
Prior preparation and planning prevents piss poor performance.
Gotcha.
So all the things that, I've spoke about, learning off my grandmother and my grandfather and my mother and things about horses really helped me in the AW.
Yeah, no kidding.
It sounds silly, but I heard Danny the other day talking about your interview with Danny, and we were talking about the AW and how to prepare for it and things like that. There's all those things that have happened in my life are things that have backhandedly helped me in that, especially, the army. The army, like teaching people in the army. So I got to rank at corporal. I was an instructor. Now, all of the things that you do when you're in the career in the army is teaching by catchwords and phrases. So when you're teaching somebody something in the army, you're teaching somebody who's never picked up a rifle in their life. And if you don't teach them right, it's as low as put a bullet in you.
Mm-hmm.
You need to teach, and you teach by catchwords and phrases. Chris said something to me one day. I think he calls it follow the leader.
Yep.
And that's something similar to what you do in the army. Say, like this, do that. And you lead by example.
Okay.
People can follow that a lot easier than they can. Like, if you read a book, people think that studying is reading a book. It's a known fact that if you read books, you can only retain probably 30% of the information. And especially we're farriers, we're more kinetic than we are anything else. We tend to do things and remember things by doing. And most people do. You can't just tell someone how to do something and expect them to do it. So all these things that you learn over the period of time, they'll hold you in good stead at things like that. It's like, exams like that. And what I done, every time I get in trouble with something, I have a catchword for it or a phrase. Like if somebody asks me what the four first bones in the horse are, and I'll say, sure, SHUR,
Right.
And, little things like that. And how I sort of done it, as I studied, I was lucky. My very good friend, and I wouldn't have passed the AW if it wasn't for him. Steve Crosby, him and I, he lives in Queensland, but him and I would send each other a question each day. And we'd do the exam or write it down and we'd email it back to each other. We'd go through it, pick out where we could have better answered or could have done something else, you know. Sometimes you'd get to the point where you'd say, oh, I didn't even think about that one. Something that you never even thought about. Oh, I didn't even think that'd be on the, you know. And it's that sort of thing. You've got to think outside the square, and somebody else has got to do it with you. It's no good to just sitting there and reading a book and trying to remember it. It won't work like that. So I just got a big poster, put it on the wall, and I'd just go through it. And tonight we'd study bones, you know. Then we'd study ligaments and then tendons, and then we'd break down the bones, and, articular cartilage, how it's made, you know, synovial fluid, all that sort of thing. We'd go through all those things, and we'd work out questions so that we were hoping that we'd get there and we didn't have a question that we couldn't answer. Don't know if it always works like that, Brian, but so and how I always answered the questions. I know different people. One thing about the AW exam or any Westfield Company exam is that you've got to answer the question that's given to you, and you've got to answer it in a methodical manner. Again, the Army played for me because I just remembered SMEAC. We used to call it SMEAC in the Army. So situation, mission, execution, admin and communication. So it doesn't matter what you use as long as you've got a methodical way of doing it. I think Danny said that the other day too. But it's got to, and you know, Daniel's an ex-Army guy too, and that's why Daniel and I get on so well because we're both mad. I'm not as mad as him, Brian, but.
Well, I have noticed a trend. He always likes the episodes more when the person has been in the military, and he always makes a point of letting me know that. Former Army, I don't know if you noticed.
It's a common thing, though, for guys that have been in the military because it's like a club that you've been in.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that not everybody's been in, yeah.
And, you know, you've obviously got to be like-minded people or you wouldn't do it. So the military's the military.
Yeah,
but,
right.
Yeah, well, David Gully's ex-Army Farrier too. That's how
right. Well, how did you meet Danny then? What is the link there?
My best friend a couple of years ago, or a long time ago now, he's not with us anymore, unfortunately. He passed away. He was Daniel Bennett's mate in the Army. And Steve Casey was an AW with honours, actually. I don't think there's many AWs with honours. I could be wrong about that. There might be, but I don't think there was too many because Steve used to always tell me he had honours. So he made a point of that. Steve moved out here to South Australia. He was an exceptional farrier and a really good bloke. You know, we competed a lot together over here on teams and different things, and we were good mates. And he was over at South Australia, which is only a half-hour flight, you know. So we'd fly back and forth to each other all the time and practice. And he set it up for me to go and work with Steve and Danny Mallender. So I was very fortunate because he worked with them. So Danny was his partner in the events in England, you know. And so that's how I met Daniel, through Steve.
Okay.
And unfortunately, Steve's not with us anymore. So
I knew there was a link somewhere, and then you mentioned Danny when I talked to you, and then I talked to Danny on the phone the other day, and he was like, oh, so I hear you're interviewing Dean. And I was like, yeah. Word travels fast.
And everything he told you about me is not true.
He played it pretty close to the vest. He didn't share too much. I guess he wanted it to come out in the interview. So
Danny's good value, but yeah, and like Danny obviously he helped with the AW as well. AW I think is a hard thing for anybody to tell you how to do it because it's based on your experience. It's your experience as a farrier. You know, you can't just read a textbook and do it because it's an experience-based exam.
Mm-hmm.
That thing that I was telling you about my grandmother and my family and all that, the horses and that, sometimes they'll ask you questions it's about your knowledge of horses as well. Like I said, I use the Army acronyms to trigger my mind and help me remember stuff. But the other way I remembered things was I was fortunate enough that I've showed that many different types of horses, not just standard breds, Clydesdales. And I didn't want to be pigeonholed as a farrier when I started shoeing professionally, and everybody would say, oh yeah, you know, he's a standard bred farrier. Well, I hated that, you know. I've shod thoroughbred racehorse stables. There used to be lots of thoroughbred studs around here, and with my thoroughbred stud experience. I used to do heaps and heaps of files. They've all sort of moved away because of weather and that here. But, I've had a very lucky career in that I've shod nearly every type of horse you could think of, with the exception of a Tennessee walking horse. I haven't shod one of them.
Oh, we'll have to ship you one over.
Yeah, thanks. Don't do it. No bother. It's okay. I'll live without that, Brian. I'll live without that. I've even trimmed a zebra. There you go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've been very lucky that way through my connections with vets and different things. I've had lots of strange, weird and wonderful things to do. But I could always, every time Mr. Curtis or Dr. Curtis or Sandy, my examiners were Dr. Curtis and Sandy Beveridge, and I can't for the life of me remember the vet's name. He's a lovely man. And I apologise to him, whoever he was. Yeah, every time they asked me a question, I could think of a case, a situation that I had a horse that was like that, and I'd say, "Oh yeah, I've had a horse like that. Oh, I've had this, or I've had that."
Right.
Yeah, I was very lucky like that, and I think when I'd done my diploma, the vet asked me something about a horse, and I said, "Oh yeah, I had a horse." And I said, "Oh," and he got off track completely. We started talking about spabbing and trotters and that, and he said, "Oh, geez, I'm supposed to ask you a few questions." He said, "Oh, it's time's up. You better go." And I thought, "Geez, how good was that?"
Well, I imagine with that much history of, like you said, your grandmother having you watch the horses and explain why they were doing the things they were doing, like that must have, you already had so much knowledge behind you.
Biomechanics was the thing because, the horses those days, they weren't bred like they are now. They've still always been North American standard bred, but they were bad gaited things, especially the trotters, your pacers were the North American standard breed, your pacer, but the trotting breed, we didn't have the good French trotters and European trotters over here at that point. A lot of them were ill-gaited pacers that you couldn't get going, so you put some heavy shoes on them and made them trot. And they couldn't, they were racing times running 212 and 210, Now they go 155.
Right.
And she'd say, "Oh, we'll see how this horse is working. You go and drag the track and then go out and then watch where his feet land."
Right.
And that's what sort of alluded me to doing a few clinics and different things on trotters and pacers, because I don't think people, but like, it's a breed that I love. The horses are a breed I love, and it's something I've done, and I think there's things to share because people don't realise there's 3 different types of trotter. So there's one pacer, but there's 3 different types of trotter.
So, and what would the 3 types be?
You got your line trotter, in-line gaited, just front legs and back legs are in line, big long barreled horses normally, quite fast. Your outside gaited trotter, or square gaiter, that trots outside with his back legs, trots outside his front feet. And a dog trotter, I call him. He trots inside with one and outside with the other.
Right, yeah, dog tracking.
They're the ones you don't want. Much as ability they might have, they've got something wrong with them in their back somewhere. And, on a recent clinic I'd done in New Zealand for mustard, I found video evidence of thoroughbreds doing the same thing, the speedy cutting.
Oh, okay.
A lot of times, I've had galloping farriers say to me, "Oh, no, they can't hit there. They say hit with this part of their foot, or they hit with that part of their foot." And not just galloping farriers, there's lots of different guys believing that horses hit with a different part of their foot to what they really do hit with, and
Right.
not understanding
Yeah.
the biomechanics of what they're doing with the feet. And, it's like my grandmother said, you got to have an inquiry mind. If you don't know why it happens, you'll never know how to fix it. And you've got to know what looks normal.
Yeah, that's the key right there.
And that's what happens with young vets now. And certainly with young farriers. It's not their fault. They haven't been brought up in an environment like I was lucky enough to see a horse every day. All they do, especially young vets, it must be very difficult for them because they study. It's a hard thing to study, veterinary, a lot to learn in a very small period of time. All they ever get told about is problems. Like, this is what it looks like when it's got this, and this is what it looks like when it's got. But they never ever show them what it looks like when it's normal. So they get there and they find they get there and straight away they've got to find a problem. It's like with it's not indifferent to teaching someone how to make a horseshoe, and you make a horseshoe and you think one of the students there, I've taught at the trade school myself, and I'm lucky enough to have been able to see what happens there. And you pick up a horseshoe and you say to the students and think, geez, that's a good horseshoe. That kid's made a good shoe. And you say to them, here, what do you think's wrong with this? And you hand it around the room and everybody will find something wrong with it. And they say, oh, what do you think's wrong with it? I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. Oh, it's a great shoe. Better than I could make. But everybody's always looking for the negative. From my point of view, and this is how I always teach the kids, it's, scapular humerus, ulnar radius. And if you know that, you know what the joints are. Scapular humeral joint, isn't it? So you take the top word and put in the next word, and you'll have the joint. And if you do that all the way down, radiocarpal joint, that's how it works all the way down, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So the top one goes to the next one. So, and why I say that, if you try to teach a kid where all the blood vessels and everything are in the foot before he knows where they all come from, it gets really, really confusing. I always learn from the top down, and it's like a highway branching off onto little roads on.
Right. Yep.
That's how I remember it anyway. It's a lot easier for me that way, but perhaps it's because us colonials are a bit slower than you, Mr. Bennett.
He'll really appreciate that. I think one of the other things that, and this is coming from my own personal experience, being somebody who I knew enough to be dangerous before I started going to school and approaching my certifications and stuff. The horse is both fortunate for the horse, but unfortunate. They're so forgiving. The feet do have some pretty lax parameters that you can see some pretty awful stuff, and they're still going.
For sure. And you see it a lot in all forms of, all disciplines of horse racing, but you see it a lot in standard breeds. You think, well, geez, man, how good is that horse?
Yeah.
The bloke reckons he's doing a great job. The horse is just so forgiving. And one thing about good horses is it's easy to shoe a good horse.
Mm-hmm.
Like a good horse. And people say, oh, they got me to shoe that horse. It won this race. I done that. And people like giving themselves a pat on the back. I suppose that's good. But 9 times out of 10, you got asked to shoe that good horse because you were the only fella that was there. You were just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. And that's how that works. And you can go around saying that you made it win the race and all the rest of it. It won the race. It wasn't you that done it. Most times they win despite what we do.
Yeah, right.
And it doesn't matter what discipline you're in, they're all the same. They're an amazing animal, horses. And it is that case too. And I've been fortunate to shoe a lot of really top-end standard breeds over the years. And like I said, it wasn't because they wanted me to shoe them. It was just because I was there.
Right.
The one thing I found about shoeing the good ones is the good ones don't have any problems. They are just good in conformation. They're good in feet. They're good in temperament. There's not very many really good horses that are hard to work with or hard to deal with. And, when you're shoeing for top-end trainers, I mentioned a New Zealand trainer that, I was lucky I shot horses for Graham Lang, Gavin Lang, and I've been fortunate to shoe horses for guys like Mark Purdon. He's just a great man to work for. They don't ask you how to do your job or tell you how to do your job. They just tell you what they want and you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And good blokes let you do your job. Good horses, they have confidence in you and you have confidence in them, and that's how it works. Let you do your job. But Graham said to me years ago when I was training, Graham Lang said to me years ago when I was training horses, and never been a truer word spoken, because I thought I was a reasonably good horse trainer. It wasn't until I gave away training horses I realised my wife was about 10 times better than me. Horses just go for her. She just had the best strike rate of any trainer I've ever seen. And her father was the same. Horses went for her, but where I made a mistake as a horse trainer, and Graham Lang said to me one day, I thought because I could shoe horses, as you said before, it's not knowing what you don't know. I was that confident in my own abilities as a farrier, I thought I could shoe horses pretty good. And I'd get these horses that people couldn't get going and were crossfire and hitting their knee or doing something stupid. And I'd say, I'll fix that up. And you'd fix it up, you'd get it better, and it'd win a race. Might take you 4 months or 5 months to win a race with it, but you'd win a race with it. And Graham came up to me one day and he said, you know what you do wrong? I said, no, what do I do wrong? I get me back up when blokes say that. But anyway, he said, you know what you do wrong? I said, no. What am I doing wrong? He said, you will never make a name for yourself doing a good job on a bad horse. He said, you make a name for yourself doing bad jobs on good ones. He said, that's what people remember you for. They remember you for good horses. They don't remember you for winning one race with some mongrel that shouldn't have won a race.
Huh.
And he was right, you know. And the other thing he used to say is, he used to say to him when you shoe a horse for him, and say, does that look right, boss? And he said, well, I don't know if it's right or not. He said, but it looks right. So if it looks right, it probably is right. Yeah, good horses don't have any problems, and bad horses as much. You know, we're talking about those dog trotters and thoroughbreds that speedy cut because they've got a doggy way of going with one leg in and one leg out and all that sort of thing. Those horses may have heaps of ability, but because of the problem that they've got, their body will never allow them to reach the pinnacle that they should. I seen one of the farriers at Eka the other day. I think it was Brad Hins. He's one of our top farriers in Australia, and he had a shirt. I'm pretty sure it was Brad. He had a shirt. He said, "It's a hammer. It's not a magic wand."
That's a great shirt.
I think it's a great one. Yeah. I'll leave the miracles to God. He can perform miracles. I'll just continue to shoot horses.
Yep. Just when you were talking about when it looks right, then it probably is right. Have you noticed as you went along, you started almost self-taught in a way, and then as you went along with your certifications and then did your AW, do you find you see a lot more now that stuff will look wrong to you that would have looked perfectly fine years ago, kind of thing, because you have that subtlety?
Oh yeah, for sure. I purposely take old horseshoes I made and hung them on the wall so I remember how bad I was at it.
Yeah.
And I think now, I go back and I think, if only I'd have known that when that horse was around,
Yeah.
I could have helped that horse.
Right.
I wouldn't have fixed it, but I could have helped it, you know. And that's the thing, we don't fix them, we manage them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what all of us, we lose the ability to, okay, we'd like to think we're helping the horses. Everybody that touches a horse, whether they be unskilled people or the top of the tree, they all want to help the horse. Nobody wants to hurt a horse. You know, they're all doing the best they can at the time. It's just that sometimes, like I said before, you just don't know what you don't know. And an example of that, Brian, is you say you got a horse. I see it a lot. Horse that got laminitis. You know, you get called to do a pony and it's got laminitis. It's going through the chronic stage and it's sore and it's everything. And they say, "Oh, can you put some shoes on it and fix it?" Well, you probably can't, but you do something. And this is what happens with trimmers, or somebody goes and trims it, and 10 days later it's walking around and they think they've done that. Well, it was going through that stage.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to get better anyway. It was nothing that you done, but you like to give yourself credit for it. You know, I'm sure we all do, because that's what we like to think we're helping. You know?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting. So I just saw a clinic. It would be about a month ago with Hank Chisholm, who's the president of the AFA, and he gives a talk about that exact same point. We were at a Farrier supply. He took us in, and there was a wall of therapeutic shoes, and he threw the one on the floor, and he said, all these things look really nice, but he said, these aren't going to fix a horse. This isn't what we're actually doing. And I think it was more along the lines of what you just said about managing it. And there's a part of me that really wants to rail against that. Like that, I'm like, well, no, that's what I'm setting out to do. I'll do that chronically foundered pony, and if I set back the shoe enough, maybe that'll make them more comfortable. I think sometimes we can help them, and we might even help them get through a stage better, maybe. But I'm starting to think a little bit more, listening to people with a lot more wisdom than I have, that, yeah, maybe it really did just have to go through that stage. And what I did really didn't change things that much. It's just I took the credit for it because I happened to be the one who put the the shoes on later, right?
As long as you get paid for the credit, that's it.
Yeah, it's true.
That's true. I mean, there's instances where we can make a huge difference, but when we talk about gait interference, things like that, yeah, we can influence things there, but most an influence, and again, you're probably not fixing it.
Mm-hmm.
To every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah.
And so if you change one thing, see, trainers, especially harness racing trainers, they're always looking for the next gimmick.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And they think if they can get a gimmick that someone else hasn't got, oh, that's going to work, going to be plastic shoes, or this, it's going to be that, it's going to be something else. I've seen that many gimmicks come and go over the years. But at the end of the day, most of the things were that you couldn't have fixed it anyway because it had a crooked leg, or it was doing this, or it was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you fix it? No, if I could cut its leg off and I put it back on straight, yeah, we could probably fix it, but I can't do that. No, you can't fix it. And Grant Moon, I'll quote him on this one because he said, we can influence posture, but we can't influence conformation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
A horse's posture, its postural change because of some of the things we do. You know, hoof passing axis might not be correct, and especially in harness racing over the years, I've seen one of the things that I am adamant about is I always shoe horses in pairs. I always have. Ever since that day I took four horse shoes off that poor little horse and couldn't get them back on, I've always shot them in pairs. Now, I learnt that lesson very early.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I always, with standardbreds, I tend to, I wouldn't say always, but 9 times out of 10, I start with the back feet. There's a couple of reasons I do that. One is I don't like standing horse manure all day. And the other one is that I put a lot of emphasis on the back feet. I think that too often over the years I've seen standardbreds and a lot of horses, not just standardbreds, a lot of horses shod with negative plantar angle.
Yeah.
And I'm adamant that the hind legs are as important, if not more important, than the front legs. And one of the things that we see with Farrier books and Farrier education is there's a lot of Farrier books, you don't see them mention the back feet at all, hardly at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they talk about front feet. The influence of the changes on, like your bones are completely different behind. The cannon bone behind's on average 2.5 inches longer, isn't it? So if the foot's the same length, well, you're just hoping it's going to interfere, aren't you? You know, it's meant to stand up. It's meant to be a different angle. It's meant to be a different shape. You know, I remember a guy at a barefoot clinic saying to me one day, he said, "Oh, the only reason horses' feet are different behind to what they are in front is because farriers make them that way." And I said, "Mate, you haven't seen too many foals born, have you?"
No. Or dissections.
Yeah, for sure. I sent you a picture of a wild horse's foot from the northern up in far west Queensland.
Yeah.
And well, 2 feet. And like you look at that, like that horse wouldn't have been older than 8 years old probably, but no, its feet are almost perfect, aren't they?
Yeah.
And like a textbook shape,
Yeah.
really, aren't they?
Yeah.
Apart from the fact that it was dead and the frogs were a little bit atrophied, but been sitting in the sun for a while, Brian, but that's how they are. So yeah, back feet to me are very, very important, and especially when you talk about some of the disciplines that we do now. You know, horses. And I've been working on this one for a while. I've done it at the clinic. I mentioned it at the clinic. I've done in New Zealand not so long ago. Of the weight change, like whereas a horse, when you're pulling a cart, the weight's got to move backwards. The weight distribution is nowhere near the same as what it is when you've got a jockey sitting over the engine room. You know?
Mm-hmm.
A horse when it's galloping, well, galloping's a single beat gait. You know, standardbred racing's 2 feet on the ground at a time. So that's another thing that influences injuries and different things that horses get. A galloper's got so much more pressure on its legs than a standardbred does.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I was talking to a vet the other day that I work with a lot, and he was saying recently, and I don't know if you might be able to find this on the computer somewhere, but Dr. Chris Whitten from the University of Melbourne recently done a lecture down at Cranbourne for RVL, Racing Victoria Limited, and it was to do with research that he found on horses that undergo catastrophic injuries in racing, and apparently very, very interesting. So, you know, he was talking about speed being, I think I wasn't there, but that's what the vet told me. He was talking about speed being catalyst to most of those things and services, you know. So it's very interesting, and, you know, I'm fortunate I get in trouble, I can ring Dr. Chris and a few other people and ask them for a bit of help, or if I'm stuck on a case or something that I don't know anything about.
Yep.
Yeah, whatever that clinic was that he done, it was on catastrophic injuries in racehorses.
Well, and that actually leads me to a question. Did you have a change there in your track surfaces to the more synthetic? We had here where they changed all the tracks over to a synthetic, almost like a rubber footing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the catastrophic injuries were just every day. And apparently it was brutal. So you had a similar situation there?
Yeah, the thoroughbreds they certainly did get all season tracks and different things, and that was part of what he was on about, I think. And that definitely, it echoed throughout the industry, the thoroughbred industry, that was one of the issues. It's probably not it's a personal opinion. I've seen it in standard breds, and this is just 30 years ago, we used to race on tracks that were like concrete, and we'd see a lot of corns and a lot of injuries, pedal bone fractures and catastrophic injuries. No, not catastrophic injuries, but, fractures and different things, not things the horse have to be put down about, but reoccurring injuries, tendons, a lot of them. And then there was a shift to make the tracks the surface of the trotting tracks a little bit more like they had in the US.
Okay.
So they had a solid space underneath, but they were churned up, and everybody used to think that you'd have to have a track like concrete, so they'd go fast and break 2 minutes. But once they found that they churn the tracks up and use these track conditioners and that, when I was in the US, I went to Los Alamitos, and all day the big tractor was driving around churning up the track. I just think how beautiful the surface was. You couldn't hear basically the trotting tracks now, if you see them, when the horse hits the ground, you can see it'll fill its concavity of its foot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that facilitates better function, personally.
Right.
I certainly think the other thing that probably has affected or helped with a lot of the injury problems in standard breds is the fact that aluminium shoes have got so much better, so we have a lot more cover on the foot now, whereas we used to have those little 1/4-inch shitty pieces of concave that you couldn't bend or twist, and no clips and nothing like that. But horseshoeing in Australia, it's got that much more product than that we can use. The stuff's a lot better than what it used to be. I like to put the aluminium shoes where plenty good enough these days, so I like to put plenty of cover on their foot and give them something to stand on.
Right. In Australia, what is your supply like as far as getting shoes and things like that? Is it tough, or are there supply houses all over?
No, there's not a great deal of them. I mean, there's Kirkhart horseshoes, Dwyer's or Mustad. Mustad, I mainly use Mustad products. There's nothing produced, nothing made in Australia anymore. Everything's been moved offshore. So the supply problem, especially the logistics during COVID, that became a problem.
Right.
Because, they couldn't, talking to Dan O'Dwyer at Mustard, and Dan's Carl's son, he was telling me that the problem that they're having is, getting containers. They couldn't get containers. They were stuck in ports, that people couldn't get into ports because people had COVID, and they couldn't unload them, and all these sort of weird and wonderful things were happening. So there was a bit of a Mustard done the best they could to keep everybody supplied, but sometimes you'd run a bit short. I always got a fair supply of concave or aluminium sitting around. If I need to, I can make something if I have to. So Colin Smith did say that to us one day. He said, everybody says there's no need to make shoes, but what happens if you can't ever get them?
Yeah, that actual scenario basically happened for a lot of people. It became a reality.
It's definitely a good skill to have. And I mean, okay, you go to competitions and you make shoes, and you're lucky enough to get a ribbon or something, and they think, geez, I'm good at this. It doesn't mean you're the best farrier there. It just means you're the quickest one, or the judge liked your stuff on the day.
Yeah.
The one thing we've all got to come to terms with is it's competitive farriers and all that sort of thing. It's all good, and some people that can't do them things, they look at us and say, "Oh, you think you're clever because you can do that." Well, that's not the case. It's everybody has something they like to do, or a pastime. That a lot of these guys, their pastime is doing something they enjoy, which is making horseshoes and going to shoeing competitions and wasting money and drinking beer and seeing their friends. But it doesn't mean you're the best farrier in the world. It just means you're the best one on the day. But we sometimes lose a little sight, thinking we're just because we won a competition, we're some sort of a superstar and we don't have to pack the gear up afterwards. But we can go and have a shower and come back and get our ribbon. But yeah, it doesn't work like that. Everybody's got to chip in. We're a very small community and a very tight-knit community. And if everybody doesn't pull their weight, well, it just won't happen anymore.
Yeah, for sure. Now, in your day-to-day practice, do you hand make any shoes that you put on, or is it mostly kegs right now?
No, I hand make all my bar shoes.
Yeah.
I always hand make my bar shoes. If you're going to put a bar shoe on, it's got to fit, hasn't it? So I've always done that. And normally aluminium.
Okay.
They're normally aluminium. I don't put many steel ones on. A couple of reasons for that. One's cover without too much weight.
Right.
You use that word Danny and you come up with that one the other day talking about the diploma. We use that word support. Well, it's stabilised. Stabilised. Yeah. We won't use the word support just to stabilise things. And the other advantage I think with aluminium is that if the horse has got a little niggling problem, it can break where it wants to break over where it wants to break over, and it'll wear away where it wants to wear, and be a little bit more comfortable. Stabilisation, what we're after there. And why I started using aluminium, basically, how it all happened. Come up with this idea that I thought, well, geez, if you could make these out of, and this is another interesting point that I think happens. I started welding aluminium inserts into aluminium shoes. I've always taught myself how to weld, so I bought a MIG weld and I started welding aluminium inserts into shoes, and I got reasonably good at that. And then I started making aluminium shoes, and I'm thinking, well, it's a lot better making the shoes than it is welding these stupid inserts in. There was a very good horse that a friend of mine, David Aiken, had, and he used to use outer rims, so we used to, Lenny the Shark, his name was, he was top horse, won a lot of races, and he used to race in outer rims, so he had little corn problems, so I used to weld inserts in for him, right? That was just to race in. When you make a shoe out of aluminium being 20 by 10 or 25 by 10 or whatever, you guys in millimetres over there or still back in inches?
Oh, we're inches back in the past, feet and inches.
Inch by 3/8 then. If you made a heart bar, it was the same thickness all the way through, you know?
Yeah. Instead of having the insert be less.
Yeah, the insert's either going to be away from the foot surface or away from the ground surface, one of them.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that didn't make any sense. If you're going to make a shoe, you should be the same thickness all the way through, unless you're facilitating some issue that you've got. So that's what I started doing. I thought, well, I started making lots and lots of aluminium shoes and trying to perfect it and get good at it. I remember Steve came down here, Steve Crosby came down here. I said, do you make your own aluminium bar shoes? And he said, no, I can't make them. And I said, well, you should be using them more than anyone because, Steve and we both work in the racing industry, be it thoroughbred or standardbred. And I said, I don't know how you get away with not making aluminium bar shoes. He said, I don't know how to do it. I said, well, I'll show you. So I showed him how to make an aluminium bar shoe, and he always says to me, you know how many of them I put on? He said, I've put thousands of them on now. And he said, and we worked out the other day, it costs us $5 to make a pair. To make a pair of aluminium bar shoes costs you $5. Okay, the benefit of it is that you've got the cover and you've got no weight. The real benefit of it is it only costs you $5, so you don't have to go and see. Danny was talking the other day. He said about Blurt and shoes, and Jim Blurt makes beautiful shoes. I'm not canning the shoes, but if you get a bar shoe, he said sometimes a two, if you make it, it's got to be spot on, hasn't it? So, and the thing is, when you buy a bar shoe, you pay $60, $80 for them over here, or probably even more than that now. It's hanging in the back of your rig, and it's sitting, and they're wasting money, and it's sitting there smiling at you every time it walks past. The only one that thinks that's great is Jim Blurt or Mustard or whoever sells them to you. I like these $5 ones, mate, and I just charge the $60 or $80. That's money in my pocket.
Yep, and you're being paid for your experience, right?
Of course you aren't, but when you make an aluminium bar shoe, I think somebody timed me the other day. I was making one for Barry Purden, actually, when he was over here with a horse from New Zealand, and I made a bar shoe for him, and he said, that only took you 8 minutes. Plain stamped it, didn't full it or nothing, I just plain stamped it. And I said, did it? Aluminium gets so hot so quickly.
Mm-hmm. And then stays hot.
You don't have to use much gas. And it's easy. It's not taxing on your body like flogging a piece of inch by steel around or anything like that. So it's so much easier and so much quicker. So believe for the life of me why people don't use it as much as they should. Well, I think they should use it more often, but Ian Guyjack tells me I'm the aluminium king or some bloody thing.
Yeah, well, you must be the Aussie version of Dave Showen, because that was his thing, right? He was the one that figured out how to make the aluminum bar shoes and then toured the U.S. showing other people how to do it.
Oh, Dave likes that, does he?
So, yeah.
And how does Dave, does he just stick weld them or?
I never asked him what his actual method was. I'm pretty sure it is, exactly that with the flux. And then at the time, nobody knew how to do it in his area.
Well, We got a little joke over here about that. I showed Steve Crosby how to do it. A chap that I know quite well. I was there one day and he said, "Oh, how do you weld aluminium bar shoes?" And I said, "Oh, do it like this." And he said, "Oh, that's the Crosby method." I said, "It's the what?" And he said, "It's the Crosby method." He said, "Steve Crosby must have shown you." I said, "Yeah, that's." So I showed Steve Crosby, but we call it the Crosby method now because he takes claim for everything, anything good now because he's.
Well, now the world knows. At least anybody who listens to this episode. So yeah, the Crosby method.
We'll call it the Crosby method. But yeah, it works. It works very well. But I was in New Zealand and a very good friend of mine, Pat Szymanski, one of the best tool makers, shoemakers, great Farrier, and a great bloke. Pat was there one day. We were welding these aluminium shoes. And I said, "You do a lot of playing around doing that, Pat." And he said, "Oh, yeah, it's not that easy to weld." And I said, "Well, you know why?" He said, "No, why?" And he was getting them welded. I don't know how he did it. Well, you know why? He was using the completely wrong rods. He was using 53, 56. You got to use 43.
Oh, okay.
43 you got to use them. I said, "Those ones are for TIG welding, Pat." I said, "I don't even know how you're getting them welded." He said,
Okay.
I said, "Bruce, you bought me the wrong rod, you mongrel." So I don't even know how he got it welded, but he did.
What do you guys use as the flux? Is there a product or do you have like a homemade remedy?
They used to make a flux in Australia, but they don't make it anymore. There's a flux I use now that comes from Germany, and I can't even pronounce it. It's pronounced
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the stuff we use is Swan from England.
I can send you a picture of the bottle, but I put a few videos on my Facebook page of me doing it, so it should show you the flux on there. So if you go back far enough. Cecil used to make one, but this stuff, it's a powder, and I just put it on. Steve wets it down. He uses the Crosby method, but he wets it down. I don't bother it because what happens if you wet it down, it cools the shoe, and so I just sprinkle it on, and you'll see it go crystalline and wet. It's ready to weld. As soon as it does that, it's ready to weld. I'll send you a picture of the bottle.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll have to watch some of your videos.
It comes from Germany somewhere. I can't speak German.
Yeah, neither can I. 9. That's all I know. Yeah, that's about it. Well, was there anything else you wanted to cover before we go into the short questions?
No, the only thing I was thinking of is just gait analysis because I use a GoPro on a lot of the horses now.
Oh, do you?
Especially trotters and pacers, and I've been doing a fair few videos with it. I did a lot of trials with it, trying to get it right and just seeing how they go. It's amazing when you put it on the carts.
Right.
You slow it down and see what they do. It's taught me a lot about how horses interfere and different things. So.
No kidding. And how much you can affect change, or I guess in some ways it's not a lot of change. It's just getting them that half an inch or quarter of an inch away from themselves that makes all the difference, right? A miss is a miss. What
I found with shoeing knee knocking is obviously the most interference in a trotter or a pacer. I've done a little survey. I took a lot of data when I was working at there for a while, the harness races at Melton, and I took a lot of data on conformation. I got all these data sheets up. I measured all the feet, and done all that sort of thing, angle gauges on them, and they weren't horses that I shot. I just just random horses, and I talked to the trainers and interview and just see what the horses' problems were, if they had any problems, if they didn't have any problems. Took pictures of their legs, and as I sent you the other day, so as whether the horse has got an angular limb deformity or whether the horse had a rotational limb deformity, or mainly targeted at, it was only front leg, so it was only targeted at knee knocking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really not knee knocking. It's, get real technical, it's actually the radius that they hit, the medial styloid of their radius. They don't really hit their knee. They hit the medial styloid of their radius. And so that's where your knee boot goes around. Everybody says it's their knee. It's a knobble on their knee, but it's not their knee. It's the radius. So that point that sort of sticks out on the inside, that you either got to get them over or under. And you can get them over, but it all comes down to changing basically your angle, your toe length and your angle. And, of course, when you're shoeing a pacer or a trotter, a lot of people think they've got different shaped feet. There's this myth that harness racing horses have long, narrow feet. Well, most of mine, they just put them in a race plate and you don't have to change much. They got round pedal bones, and while they got round pedal bones, they'll have round. It mimics, the foot mimics the bone, doesn't it? You can't influence that. greatly. I found with them is that you've got to compromise somewhere. Everywhere there's got to be a compromise. So sometimes you make a bit longer toe, you're going to be putting more pressure on the deep digital flexor tendon because it's a little bit longer. Right? But with a standard bred and a pacer, it's nowhere near as detrimental putting a outer rim shoe or something like that on that's going to lengthen the toe. It's nowhere near as detrimental as it would be on a thoroughbred because it's a different gait. There's 2 feet on the ground at a time. The weight distribution is completely different. So sometimes you can influence it by your length of stride. Like your toe's a little bit longer, then the flight of the horse's foot's going to be lower.
Mm-hmm.
Every textbook will tell us that.
Right.
If it's upright, well, it's going to be upright. It's going to go up and over. And so sometimes you can put a severe breakover on the shoe itself.
Yeah.
It might rip into its knee more because it gets off its outside toe too quick. Whereas you put an outer rim shoe on and lengthen the toe just a little bit, and you might just come under that. And as you said, you only got to just miss it.
Okay.
A lot of the tracks over there might be mile tracks or something, whereas a lot of the tracks here could be half mile. They used to be half mile tracks, but they're probably a little bit bigger now, 900 metres or so.
Mm-hmm.
Going around those cambered turns, if the horse starts hitting its knee and it starts hanging, it's going to compound the problem, isn't it? So when I've done this survey, done this research, if you want to call it that, I don't know what you call it.
Sounds like research to me.
Yeah, it sounds like research, yeah, but sounds like a better word, research, sounds more important. Yeah, so I started doing all these things, took pictures of the horses, measurements, all those sort of things. And what I ended up finding was that it was pretty evident that 85% of the horses that hit their knee have a rotational limb deformity. Angular limb deformities didn't seem to cause much trouble at all.
Really?
Which was fascinating to me because I never set out to prove one thing. It's not research if you set out to prove something.
Yeah, right, yeah.
You've got to go and take the data and put it in the computer and see what it says. Yeah, so that's what it showed me. So that was something I was going to get around to doing one day, but haven't finished up. But
see what comes, yeah.
We've always got something. There's always, you never know what's around the corner.
It sounds like maybe something for your FW.
Not in the sites at the moment, FW. No, I'll never say never, but that's not something I don't think it's probably not that beneficial to me.
No? Okay.
Go and do a bit of teaching and that sort of thing anyway. But Mr. Garley and Danny are always telling me I should go and do it. Daniel Bennett needs to do his before I do it.
Peer pressure.
Yeah, well, you never say never, but one day it might suit me. But I've got a few other things on the plate at the moment. Like
okay.
My wife and family have been very supportive of all the rubbish that I go on, down to Farrier competitions and running around all over the world, doing things and doing clinics and doing AWs and doing dip Ws. And it's time you got to pull your head in a bit and give back to your family. So you can't be selfish all the time. Although my wife tells me I do a very good job of that. But there's a few things I'd probably still like to do if I live long enough.
Out of curiosity, was there a specific placement of the rotation that showed up more than in the others, like in the cannon bone or?
They were all horses that stood out, obviously. There was nothing that was like anything that was rotated inwards, like a pigeon-toed horse would normally happen from being fetlock varus anyway. But no, they all seemed to, it was the radius that was rotated out. Like they seemed to come from the shoulder. That's what was most prevalent. The funny thing about it was that a lot of those horses weren't shod by professional farrier. A lot of the trainers shoe them themselves in harness racing. All the angles were pretty consistent, really, because I'd take a measurement of the toe length, and the other thing I'd done, I measured the dorsal wall, I measured the lateral wall, I measured the medial wall, and I measured the lateral wall, as well as the hoof passing axis, to try and determine that if the hoof capsule had changed at all and whether it was significant that it was lower on one side or lower on another side. It wasn't really significant. It was like there was a couple of mil between a few of them, but they weren't, like, a bigger horse obviously have a longer toe, and you could work on 5 mil difference between a smaller horse and a bigger horse, but there wasn't any significant change in the hoof capsule shape itself. I thought it was surprising because I would have thought that more of those horses would have had sheared heels or quarter cracks or things like that, but they didn't. So, as like you said before, they're very forgiving, aren't they? They seem to improvise, adapt, and overcome. I don't know why, but they do. They're just amazing animals.
Yeah, no kidding. Sometimes I think, well, especially in the beginning of my career, thank goodness they are. I probably wouldn't still be shooting.
I think you're not on your own there, Brian. I think that's happened to us all.
Yeah. This portion of the podcast is called the Stratum Tectorium. These are the short answer, surface stuff questions, but it's okay if the guest wants to go deeper. Enjoy. What's your favorite book?
My favourite book is a book called Bill the Bastard. That's got everything in it that I love. It's got history.
What's that about?
It's about Australia's war horse called Bill. Yeah, it's a very good book to read. Actually, I don't know how much of it's true or not, but I think it's pretty accurate.
Oh, really?
The end part might not be quite right, but Bill was in a battle. I can't think of it. He would only let one bloke ride him, but in a battle, I can't think of where the place was now. But this lieutenant rode in to save 4 troopers, and he carried 5 blokes out in the battle. So I think 2 jumped up in the stirrups, one on the back and one over his withers, and he carried. There's a statue to him up in Queensland. They made a statue carrying these 4 guys out of the battle.
Cool. Okay. Bill the Bastard. What's your favorite brand of nails?
Mustard. I always use mustard nails. So once you get on a good nail, you just stay there. And I usually use, what do you call them? Concaves. Concave 3 up to 6. Yeah. So I shoot a wide variety of horses, so I just pick it out.
What shoe sizes do you generally have to stock the most of? I guess that's a hard one to answer, right?
It is, but the most common one to use is around a size 7 plate, size 7 and 8 plate, because there's so many different shoes. You call them over there of 1, perhaps.
Okay.
There's all different sizes there. But if you're looking at plate sizes,
right,
they're 7 or an 8. They're 7 or an 8.
Okay. Yeah, we have the same thing here where the plates are different, size different. What's your favorite make of rasp?
XL Legends, the green chip.
You and everybody else. What is your dream Farrier rig? And I saw those pictures of the one now. I'm wondering if it isn't that one, the one that you have.
That's the way I've worked towards. Little front compartment and iPad and all that go. It's pretty good, but it's a 4-wheel drive, so it's as good a rig as I've ever had. It's set up pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
They're not as nice. I always would love to have one of those big American rigs, but that's a Stonewall box I'd love to have, but I can't justify the cost. I'm at the end of my career. I'm not paying $8 for a truck. Definitely has to be a 4-wheel drive. I'm sick of driving into paddocks and not being able to get out of them. Yeah, it's pretty good, that little truck. So it's a Mazda, what is it, BT50. I think it's only got a little 2-point. I think it's only got a little 2-point something Isuzu motor in it. Not one of those big beastie looking things like you got.
Yeah, my trucks, they're great until the diesel price jumped to double. So
now you know why they put the tissues beside the diesel pump, don't you? So you can dry your tears away afterwards.
Well, that makes more sense now, yeah. Oh, and one other question on that. Does it slide out? Like, can you actually take it off and then just have a flatbed?
Yeah, you take it off.
The way the clamps are.
Just lifts off. Yep. Just lifts off. Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. Perfect. What's your favorite rounding hammer?
I make a couple of tools, so I've got a couple I made there. But the one I use every day is just one of those little mustard rounding hammers. I find they're as good as any. Just the smaller one. Doesn't have to be too, and it's just nice and easy, and they're
okay,
cost effective, and they're great.
Favorite type of bar stock to work with?
Oh, aluminium. It's 1 by 3/8. If you've got a bar of that in the back of your truck, you can do anything. It doesn't matter what.
Yep.
If you need to draw it down, you can draw it down. If you need a bigger shoe, you can put a bigger shoe on. If you can cut it out and make it concave if you want to, you can do it. And it'll get you out of trouble in no time. And it'll be cheap. It only costs $5.
He's got it all worked out. What's your favorite pastime after work?
Got a couple. I practice karate. I do that
cool.
a couple of times a week. Practice every day, but I'll do a couple of times a week. Train. Try to keep fit. I like taking the kids fishing. My wife doesn't like going fishing. She reckons we don't catch anything. Doesn't matter whether you catch them or not, as long as you go. Huh? I'm not a bad fisherman. They just don't like me bait.
Yeah,
that's all.
Yeah, I have the same problem.
I do competition shooting as well, both pistol and rifle, military.
Oh, really?
Yep. like shooting. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, we don't have access to much as far as weaponry here, so.
Rayleigh, she's got plenty of guns. Rayleigh Desiato, she'll have plenty of guns down there for you.
Yeah. What's the next thing on your bucket list?
I would love to travel over to your part of the country and see I've never been over to the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
Seen the standardbreds over there. I'd like to see it before it's all gone. The way it's going, it's not looking too good.
Yeah.
I've been to France and seen the trotters in Europe, and just beautiful horses. And I love Paris and I love France, and the trotters over there are just unbelievable. You know? Different world to here.
Yeah.
I would like to one day probably travel over there and see them on the East Coast, do the trotters and paces over there, and never know, do a clinic or something. Go to the Farrier convention one day. I've got to do that too.
Yeah. Well, let me know when you are coming our direction. Gladly have you in. And we'll set up a clinic and everything.
I will, for sure. All right, good.
That'd be great. So I'm guessing your favorite brand of keg shoe would be Mustad.
No, it's not actually. No, my favourite one's the Malaysian Outback.
Oh, okay.
They're nice little shoes, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not familiar with those.
Obviously, I've used Mustad plates and all that sort of thing, and O'Dwyer Payson shoes. But no, they're just a little concave shoe with side clips in front.
Okay.
Side clipped hinds I normally use. They're just a nice little section. Got good little shape to them. Nice little squared off back foot, so squared off toe on the hinds. They're the ones I use on most of and they're pretty universal.
Right.
As they go up in size. You can go up to the Malaysian qualities, which are a little bit heavier if you've got a bigger, heavier horse. But normally I get up to a bigger horse, I just make them.
Now, do you use a stall jack, or are you able to use a forge when you're shoeing them at the track, or how does that work?
Oh, we don't shoe at the track much. We always shoe in stables. I don't work at the track anymore.
Oh, okay.
No, I've never used a stall jack. I bought a little anvil when I started, 25 kilo anvil, had these little turning cams on the side, and I've still got it. You're probably going to ask about favourite anvils, but I'd never have to say it's that one because I make so much money with it. But if I'm turning like aluminium shoes or something like that, it's worn in now, so it doesn't mark the shoe. So
right,
I just use that. But I do use an anvil. Always got a big anvil on the back of the truck. I think you should have seen that swing out anvil I've got on my truck.
Cool. What's your ideal number of horses to shoe all around in one day?
6. That's a nice number. The days of doing 18 are gone.
Favorite anvil?
My favourite anvils, I got a Legend. That's the best anvil I've ever had. It's a beautiful anvil. It's in my workshop. But I suppose if you talk about favourite anvils, so on the back of my truck, I swing out now. I won that at a contest. It's an O'Dwyer anvil called the Centurion. It's got everything on it. It's a lovely anvil to use. I think it's made for the US market because hasn't really got a round horn on it, but I'll just make shoes on it all day. It's got lovely clip and edge and everything. It's good steel. It's
okay.
Lovely anvil. Centurion, I think it's called.
Okay. Favorite inspirational quote?
Good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better best.
Where's that from?
It was written on the back of the Furphy water tanks.
Okay.
I was always told it was to inspire the troops overseas during the First World War, but I don't think that's true. I think it was there before that.
Oh, okay. Do you have a Farrier Terrier?
I've got a workshop cat.
Do you?
He's an unusual cat. Most cats don't like noise, but he'll sit up there. I've got the power hammer or the press going and making shoes, and he just sit there with his little paws crossed watching.
Really?
Yeah, he don't care about the noise. As soon as I start to forge up, he comes over and sits up on the bench and watches me. Yeah, no, he's different.
This is nice and warm. Wow, that is an unusual cat. And does he live in the shop?
He's a cat. He lives where he wants to live.
Or he just goes out there? Oh, okay.
As soon as you go to the shop or anybody's at the shop, Steve was down a couple of weeks ago. He just come into the shop and sat there and watched us make shoes and shit. He's a weird cat.
That's funny. Now, you kind of answered this already. If you're stumped on a case or need backup, who do you call?
It depends on the case, to be honest with you. I've got a lot of vets that I can call if I want a diagnostic view or a veterinary opinion. There's lots and lots of them, and I'm very fortunate like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you just do a job and you think, could I have done that better? And normally it's Steve Crosby. I'll give give him a ring. And sometimes it's just not that you didn't know what to do. Sometimes you forget about one. And the other guy I consult with things like that is, I quite often talk to Danny about different ways of doing things. And
Yeah.
like obviously different conditions in England to here, but at the moment they're not.
Right.
Just like London, just like England at the moment, it's that wet. But Danny and Steve
Okay.
probably the two
Gotcha.
guys I think.
Yeah, it sounds like you and Denny talk quite a bit, don't you?
Yeah, he's got no other friends.
Okay, do you have a favorite shoe or package for mystery lameness when you don't have a diagnostic?
If it's interference related, as I said to you before, we use GoPro. Like if it's for a horse that's got a problem and we can't really figure out what's going on, whether it's, and quite often you put the GoPro on and send them around the track or something. It doesn't have to be a standard breed. You don't have to put it in a cart. You just put the GoPro on them or take them around the dressage ring, and see how the foot's landing or wherever they're working, whatever surface they're working on. I had the same similar sort of thing with having trouble with one of the new surfaces they put on with one of the dressage event facilities. And the horse was really struggling with the surface and it was just getting too much grip. And it wasn't until we put the GoPro on it, slowed it down, we figured out what that was. And it doesn't cost anything other than have a GoPro. And you learn as well as the client, and the client can see at least you're trying, having a go. Other than that, we can't figure out if we think it's a foot-related thing. I always try to involve the vets. And I know, as you said, sometimes people can't afford to, but if I'm at a loss, I found those 3D pads work very well. The new 3D pads.
Okay.
Blurton, I don't know what, Derek's pads or whatever they are, Derek Poupard or whoever made them. And mate of mine makes some in Melbourne, Vaughan Ellis. He makes hind ones for me, but I find a lot of those things, if there's a mystery lameness, it's usually related to your trimming somewhere along the line. You've either got a negative plantar angle, negative palmar angle. Normally, if you could correct things and make it look right, it'll tend to work itself out. And so I think a lot of your other guests have said it's trimming, and that's what horseshoeing is, isn't it? It's trimming. You just put the shoe on to protect your trim, don't you? And to facilitate what you can't do with your trim. But I think that's the most common sense is always way. Like I said before, if it looks right, it is right. So just try and get things back to basics. That's probably the best way, I think.
Right. Out of curiosity, when you did the dressage horse and you used your GoPro with that, how did you mount it? Like, did you go behind the horse or did you stand in the middle?
Yeah, I took it from different angles because she was saying where he was doing the diagonals, he was having a bit of strife. So then you'd go over to one side and videotape.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's how we done it. Just mounted it in different places, Brian. I'd love to be able to put a GoPro, and I think someone has. A guy was telling me the other day when we were talking about it. I can't think of who it was, but I'd love to mount a GoPro on a thoroughbred going through a gallop. I'm thinking the only way you could do it is probably put it on its chest and between its front legs pointing backwards. I think that'd be the only way. But I'd love to do it. I really would. Yeah, it's great. It's a great tool.
Huh. I'm going to have to take mine off my snowboard helmet and start using it to actually help me with my job.
Yeah. I don't need my snowboard helmet. We don't have snow over here. It's all right. You can have the cold. I don't like cold.
What do you use as your planner?
I just use an iPad, and I find that's the best because I can just put it on the weeks, and I'll just punch in a rebook for 5 weeks and away it goes. It's all good when it's working. If it turns itself off and it starts deleting things, I get in trouble. But I use the iPad for planning, and then I'll just write in my book what I do the day, and then I give that to the boss, and she works out the accounts. It's her money. I'm not allowed to have it.
I tried the iPad route, and it's funny, we were just talking about cold. I couldn't keep it warm enough during the winter to use it properly.
Wow. Things that you don't think about, because we don't deal with cold weather like that here.
It would, the batteries don't work well when they're super cold. And if you were at a stop all day, I mean, save for putting it over top of the forge, which I'm not sure how well that would go, I couldn't keep it warm enough. So I eventually gave up on it.
I couldn't believe when I got to Calgary there when we were walking around, and obviously it was lovely when we were at the Stampede, Weather was beautiful, but I'm walking around. I thought, what's all those little funny little box things there? And I said to someone, they said, oh, that's to keep your car warm when it's cold. I said, what? Little electric blankets for cars. I couldn't believe it. So you don't think of things like that over here. You need to think about how to keep cool and not warm up.
Right. Yeah. Not worrying about your car not starting. Yeah, that's a thing. What's your favorite method of soothing aches and pains?
I like to go down. They got a big hydro pool down at the local gym. I like to go down there and get in the warm water, something warm that seems makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I do the same thing. Favorite drink?
Cider.
Okay. Favorite genre of music?
I like any sort of music, really, but country music's my favourite.
Okay. And I guess you do work out with your karate.
Yeah, I train every day. You wouldn't think so looking at me.
Seem pretty fit. And second last, what would you be if not a farrier?
I wanted to be an armourer in the army, actually. That's what when I joined
Really?
the army, I thought this will be good. I liked fitting. I'd done a bit of fitting and turning when I was at school, and I thought I'd like to be an armourer. But they said, no, you're in the infantry, son. So that was it. So that never happened.
And then the last one is the COVID question. Who would you want to be stuck in a shop with for a month?
Oh, I got told how I had to answer this.
Oh, okay.
Guess who told me that? Bennett. He said, if you don't say my name, I said, I've mentioned his name, but I couldn't be locked in a shop with him for a month. If I had a choice, two of my good mates from New Zealand, Pat Szymanski and Jordan Applin, if I was locked up with them, it would be hilarious for a start. But they are two of the best tool makers I've ever seen in my life. You have enough tools to last you the rest of your life. Bennett told me I should mention him, but he missed out. He said he wasn't going to talk to me
after that month.
I didn't mention his name. I'll mention his name. That's it.
Well, he'll be disappointed. I might have to edit this out just so he'll keep talking to you. Well, hey, I really appreciate that you did this. Hopefully I'll actually get to see you at some point someday. If you're coming this direction, let me know.
I will for sure. That's good. Likewise, if you're coming down here, just hang out.
All right. Yeah, I would gladly.
Thanks for having me on, Brian. I appreciate it.
I received a list of 4 nominees for the Good On You portion of the program from Mr. Josh Burnham. Please excuse my pronunciation of the names. I'll do my best. So these are in Josh's words. Lucas Gilliland. Very welcoming when I slowly started getting back into horses this year, and a big supporter as I've been working towards my CF. Diane Lemon. Always been someone that I've been glad to help, and she's always been willing to help myself and others. And finally, Dusty Newby and Chris Gillum. Both have been more than helpful in just listening to me as I ask questions in general, regardless of how dumb they may seem. So, good on you to all of you folks. Thanks for being such great examples. As always, thank you for listening, and take care of yourselves and each other out there. We'll talk soon.